Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. My name is Cammy Bell. I'm your host on Extra, as always. And firstly, a happy new year to all of our listeners. I hope you had a wonderful time bringing in the bells, whatever you were up to. And Rangers certainly did their absolute best to get their year off to a flyer as well. And joining me to discuss yesterday's triumphant win over Celtic at Ibrox is my very favourite person in the world, Caroline Morrison. Kaz, thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, Cammy. Happy New Year to you. And yeah, thank you for inviting me. I must admit, when you did invite me onto this show pre-Old Firm game, I wasn't 100% excited about it, but now I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, it was a tactic that I wanted to be able to use where I could book a guest before the game and the result, because I was thinking to myself, that might be a tough one to do, and I need a ray of sunshine, and you can always provide that. But your joyful tones, I think, will be amplified by a stunning performance against Celtic at Ibrox. 24 hours after the event, Caroline, how are you feeling now?
Yeah, I'm still buzzing. I'm sure everyone listening is the same. And it's funny because going into the game, I think you could tell the atmosphere walking into the stadium, and from speaking to fellow fans, nobody was particularly excited about this one. There appeared to be record low levels of battle fever. But funnily, when I saw the team come out, despite all of the news during the week that, the players would be missing and whatnot, I was a little bit kind of more hopeful after seeing the team, because I thought it was the best we could produce with what was available to us. I was happy to see Hadji there, because you're going to get 100% commitment from him. And of all of the defensive choices, I actually quite like the sound of Ridvan. It's not perfect, of course, but I thought it might, given what we saw against Spurs, might just work. And yeah, delighted that things panned out that way. I think it's the type of type of back four and certain setup that you maybe wouldn't see often, because I don't think we could ride our luck with that type of setup for very long. But every player on the pitch just played out of their skins and delivered something quite fantastic.
Yeah, and listen, I think you're absolutely right about the atmosphere. I think the build up to it did feel flat. That's obviously a culmination of a number of things, the performances in Paisley and Motherwell for sure. Then, as you rightly say, we had the injury update regarding Jack Butland and James Tavernier. And so you're already not feeling confident if you were able to get in as full strength as you could make it. And then we get some key injuries, which, you just think this is just their luck. We're just kind of, this is just typical of this season. So starting lineup, as you kind of touched on there as well, I think was interesting. I think most people want to understand how the back four was going to look and feel. Ridvan Yilmaz did come in for James Tavernier at right back. Liam Kelly comes in for Jack Butland as well. So the back four were Yilmaz, Sterling, Proper at Jeffrey at left back. Diamande, Nico Raskan, Cherny, Bijrami, Hadji, and Egaman started the game. The other talking point, I think, as well, Caroline, was who was going to take the captain's armband with Butland and Tavernier both being out. And it went to Heart and Hand's own Nico Raskan. We'll get into the match. We'll talk about this as well, and obviously do the breakdown. But what was your thoughts when you saw Raskan as the captain? The selection I think was interesting to me. A lot of people were talking about, well, would it go into one of the more experienced players, maybe those who have been at Rangers for a wee while? Robin Proper obviously has held the captaincy at previous clubs. Raskan, I thought, was an interesting choice, but we're going to do a lot of praise on here, I think, for the manager, for not just the selection lineups, but also making that decision to give him the armband. Beforehand, I was intrigued by that choice. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I remember in the group chat talking about it the day before, and I think Balogun, had he been fit, would have been a good shout. I think there was calls for Sterling. That would maybe be a natural choice. I think Sterling would have done a good job at that too. And I'd suggested Raskin, just based on current form and how influential he's been this season, since he's been a regular starter and since he's kept that fitness and remained injury free. It is an interesting choice, but I like traditionally a captain leading from the middle of the park. I think it works well. Not to say that you can't have a fantastic captain elsewhere, but I just quite like it. So Raskin was edging it for me, and I think he stepped up wonderfully. Like, I think the post match interview with him and Hadji, just the way that he builds up his fellow players, the fact that he was interacting a lot with the referee. I know that that's not always Tavernier's style, and I appreciate that, because I think Tav will not get himself booked from kind of talking back to the referee or taking it too far. Raskin can sometimes be a little too passionate, and you worry that he could pick up a booking from not talking or talking too much to the ref. But I love to see that passion at the same time, that sticking up for the team, that harassing of the officials, which historically in the last kind of couple of years we haven't done very much of. And actually, I think once or twice that can have things go in your favour. Apply a bit more pressure in games like this where those decisions are going to be very influential. So little things like that I was really happy to see. And aside from that, his contribution on the pitch during the game, in the role that he had to play, was pretty much flawless.
Yeah, I totally agree. We will come back and talk about the referee, as we always have to do, because it's just some incredible decisions yesterday, but I'll touch on that shortly. As well as we could have talked a little bit there about maybe that little bit, that, quieter atmosphere. What I will say though, Caroline, is a wonderful observation in a minute's silence for the anniversary of the Ibrox disaster. It's always a very somber moment whenever you're thinking about our disasters and the fans who aren't with us any longer. And as much as I can understand the passion of having both sets of fans in, yesterday in Ibrox during that minute silence, you could literally hear a pin drop. I don't recall too many times where a silence has been as well as observed as that. And I think it's wonderful to have it. I'm not a fan of doing the minutes applause. We've had to do that in the past for other events, because we can't trust certain fans just to not try and ruin it. But yeah, it was a wonderful moment.
Yeah, and I would say it's a relief. So, as much as I do think it would be nice to have Old Firm games with a decent number of away fans in attendance, I can't say it wasn't a relief that we knew we would not have their away fans in the stadium for a New Year game, because it's always just filled with a little bit of dread. Either they ruin it, or they try to sneakily ruin it by just constantly coughing or doing stuff that completely disrespects the occasion. So one thing that I really enjoyed yesterday was all of the fans being able to respect that in the way that it should be respected. So that's the plus point. How we manage these types of games going forward, because I think I'm not sure that our fan base is going to tolerate the type of behaviour that we see from their fans on the New Year fixture in future games. We've been without them for a while now. It's going to be very hard to go back to that.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And I also just want to touch on this point as well, just very, very quickly, that if you were the fan who threw the coin at Engels yesterday, do me a favour and never, ever come back to Ibrox again, because that is out of line. Anyway, on to the game itself, Caroline. Celtic, I think, started pretty much their full-strength team. Again, as we've mentioned, we were pretty depleted. Celtic had a semi-decent chance for Kyogo, which we managed to kind of scramble clear. And what I think started to kind of get the fans on side just immediately prior to the opening goal was something that we've not seen in a long time. And that was individual battles being won, and right from the kickoff. And this is where I do want to give praise to the manager, not only for his team selection, given those injuries that we've mentioned, and also the decision to give Raskan the captaincy, but he's clearly given them the motivation to make sure that maybe it's a throwback to obviously what happened in the League Cup final, but he's obviously said to them, you have to make sure that you go out there, win your individual one-on-ones. And that isn't, when I'm saying that, that's not about slamming into people and, kicking them up in the air and all the rest of it. What it's about is just not allowing yourself to get pushed or harried or going into a second ball and not getting there first. But Rangers were at it. They were absolutely on point to be able to make sure that they were not going to be bullied in any way. We saw a couple of challenges later on, and again, I will talk about the referee for some incredible decisions. But how we took the game to Celtic after that initial scare, I think, started to really set our stall out for what was about to come.
Yeah, the first few minutes were a little bit uncomfortable, and I suppose watching it back, I don't know if it would be as uncomfortable as it felt in the time, but we don't know how these games are going to pan out. We really have seen the absolute worst of Old Firm games, and there was a fear that we would get overrun yesterday. So the first couple of minutes, having that little bit of pressure, you worry if that's just going to escalate. It didn't, of course. We managed to get things quite comfortably under control beyond that, which was nice. And you're right to talk about those individual battles all across the pitch, but a few kind of key players for me. Diamande, I've been a little bit critical of because I think he can be, for all the skill that he has and the clear talent, I think he can be a little bit soft in games, and I think he can allow himself to be, I don't know, like pressured out of games. But he did fantastically yesterday. He looked completely at home. I think the development of him as a player for playing in Scotland and in these kind of high pressure games has been massive. So really pleased with him. Also, I think that for Bayrami and Cherney, they're also being asked to do jobs as part of their overall games, which perhaps doesn't naturally come to them. So, in addition to what they would do naturally, that kind of tracking back, that covering, they did very well yesterday. And again, we didn't see that so much from them in the early parts of their career, but for them to develop on that clearly with Clement and team, I was very impressed with. Cherney is a little frustrating to watch at the time because I think he can be a little bit sloppy in possession, and I think he can give the ball away a lot, but it's only sometimes when you reflect back and watch what he does contribute that you just think, on balance, he's such an asset to the team.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. And Rangers opened the scoring in 7 minutes with a fantastic strike by Yanis Hadji, as mentioned there. Nico Raskin gets forward with the ball, pushes his man out of the way, is able to come forward, realises that he's got pretty much the Celtic back four in front of him, does a lovely little back heel roll to the on-rushing Yanis Hadji. Now, this is a great strike for two key reasons for me, Caroline. Firstly, love us being able to score outside the box and hit from distance. It's something that we've not done as much as I would like in this season. It's pinpoint accuracy. I think Schmeichel gets a little bit of a kind of easy time of it up here. I think that he's not the greatest goalkeeper, if I'm being perfectly honest. But the other thing that I loved about this goal, Caroline, was that when he had to receive the ball, if you watch it back, he has to adjust his body slightly just to be able to get the ball into his path. And it's right in the corner. Schmeichel has no chance with it. And as I say, after 7 minutes, to be able to take the lead against them, I think it just gave the entire stadium a lift. And what a noise that goal generated. And it's great to see Yanis Hadji being able to celebrate that. His father was in the stadium yesterday, obviously making sure that he gave a good acknowledgement to him as well in his celebrations. But for a player who has been playing so well after such an awkward start to the season because of his contractual difficulties, Yanis Hadji has absolutely solidified himself as someone who is, one of the first names in the team sheet at the moment.
Yeah, and I didn't appreciate that it was his dad because they did show him on screen, but because he was so covered up, I actually wasn't sure who they were showing. But what a moment for Hadji to, establish himself back into the first team after all of, like you say, the nonsense going on with contracts and whatnot. To make himself an invaluable part of the squad now, and also to score the opening goal in an Old Firm game in front of his dad. I mean, it's genuinely, it's fairy tale stuff. And you're right, he's been incredibly patient. I think he's been incredibly gracious. It's been a real tough time for him. Not without a little bit of criticism, to Hadji as well. But I think the majority of criticism I have for the situation has probably been with our board, for how that's all panned out and how at times I think he was treated. But no matter what was thrown at him, he has always been very gracious. He's been very respectful. He talks about our club, the fans, the stadium, everything with, in such high regard. He's a total advocate for us. And even at New Year there before the game, I'm sure he had an inkling that he would be starting. He had a little post up talking about some of the highlights of his year and whatnot. And, Rangers is there front and centre with his international career, which is so important to him and his family. And despite the year that he's had, which has been difficult at times, that love that he's got for our club's still there. So, yeah, really happy for Hadji. Couldn't really have hoped for any better scenario to pan out than the one that did. And the fact that it's Raskin, for all his hard work, his efforts, stepping up to be such a fantastic captain role model, to get that little back heel flick on, that was just the icing on the cake. And you're right, it was pinpoint accuracy. He had players bearing down on him, Hadji. He had almost no time to react, and he was able to pick out what looked like to me, without looking up, his situational kind of awareness was fantastic, because he placed that so perfectly in the corner of the net that some people might criticise Schmeichel there, but to be honest, I'm of the same opinion as you, Cammy. I think that he couldn't have got to that with the speed that Hadji played it and the accuracy. I think it was probably unsavable.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Vlavka Cherny, who we've already mentioned, was unlucky with a deflected shot off of Liam Scales, which hits the top side of the bar. And to be honest with you, Caroline, this is probably where, I mean, I'm keen to kind of get your thoughts on this, but there wasn't a fear from me of a repetition in the League Cup final where you take the lead and then you worry about what Celtic will do and how Celtic will react, because we were pretty dominant across the board, I think, for the remainder of the first half. The main talking points for me, and this is where I did want to come back to the referee situation. So Don Robertson misses what's quite clearly an elbow into the back of Yanis Hadji's neck by Alistair Johnson. Callum McGregor is booked. The unthinkable happens. Callum McGregor can get booked. Jeffy is then booked rightly for the use of a high arm. And the reason as to why I say rightly is because, and this is again where I get so frustrated at the inconsistency here, his arm is too high, and I don't think he deliberately means to put an elbow in, but it's too high. Player gets down. It's right in front of the near side linesman, and that's fine. Give him a booking, but you're booking him, and yet when you compare that to the Johnson elbow, as far as I'm concerned, that's where you're not doing your job properly. Then we fast forward to just before the end of the first half, and Nico Raskin, who again I absolutely agree with you. He was maintaining a good bit of composure here. In football nowadays, Caroline, whenever you see two players squaring up to each other, there's a little bit of handbags. The easiest thing for the referee to be able to do is to book both players, everybody calms down, and then you carry on with the game. You see it in world football all the time, right? It's just standard now. Don Robertson then has a decision that he has to make, and I think that this is where it comes back to some of the things that we've spoken about previously, a little bit of that influence that Celtic have, and he then realises at that point that if he's going to have to book Nico Raskin, he then also has to give Callum McGregor a second yellow card and then obviously send him off. And he goes against the grain and decides not to book McGregor because, he probably doesn't want to have to call a Glazier this weekend. And Nico Raskin is incensed, rightly so, I might add, because I probably would have had the same reaction to him. The manager spoke after the game where he said that, we have to watch how we say things and what we do within certain things. We can't get involved within the situation, because I don't think Don Robertson would think twice about sending a Rangers player off. If Raskin had kept going, then I think potentially could have talked himself into a second booking. But like all of us in the stadium, Raskin was utterly perplexed at why a second yellow wasn't shown to McGregor. And the reason as to why I mention it is because we've talked about these things after the League Cup final. We've talked about some of these decisions throughout the course of the season. And the general standard of officiating in this country is so unsurprisingly surprising in the way that it just feels that when Rangers are a goal up, it's very, very difficult for referees to take the correct action against Celtic for, what I'm going to assume now is just an absolute trepidation about the repercussions thereafter. If we had went on to beat Celtic 3-0 against 10 men, then I am certain that the narrative would have been driven to say the sending off changed everything. Whereas when you look at the game as a whole, Celtic were just not at the races because we put them out of the game. But it just infuriates me. And I have to applaud Nico Raskin for being able to show that maturity just to kind of calm down and take a breath and not walk himself into even more trouble.
Yeah, that I agree with you. I think he was, as he rightly should be, completely frustrated in that situation. I think he was getting a little bit too close to the line. I did fear that he could be shown a second yellow. What I liked in this, and criticised Clement when we need to. But what I did like about Clement is he came on the pitch at that point and almost took over that chat with the referee about questioning why on earth had that unfolded that way? Why would you book one player and not the other? To allow Raskin to kind of wander off up the tunnel and kind of get his head together at halftime. I like that. I thought that showed good leadership. And yeah, the frustrating thing from a refereeing point of view is they're not refereeing the game as it's unfolding. If you look at that coming together of the two players, McGregor's holding his shirt, Raskin reacts, it's the typical scenario where you would see both players getting a booking or both players getting a talking to and no booking whatsoever. If you book one and not the other, that's extremely unusual. And it's simply for the fact that you know that second booking is going to have a bigger impact. So you're not refereeing the game as it's unfolding. You're refereeing with that voice in the back of your head to go, oh, actually, that means this, so I can't do that. Or even off field, if I do this, what's going to happen, like you say, for the rest of the week in the papers, what's going to happen to my future career, blah, blah, blah. So it's just refereeing with that in the back of your mind and not just refereeing what you're seeing in front of you. Scottish referees are notoriously bad for that, I think. And it's to the detriment of the general refereeing in Scotland. It just means that we have some perplexing decisions being made, and the decisions are also completely, different game to game. There's no consistency there.
Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true. We get into the second half, and again, I want to give praise to the manager as well. Caroline didn't feel the need to make any changes. Absolutely the right thing to do. Obviously, the message at halftime was, keep your focus, keep doing what you're doing, keep standing up to them. Bijrami, I thought, was doing a great job in making sure that Callum McGregor was fairly nullified, and he obviously had support and been able to do that as well. And I'm not going to sit here and say that the league race is back on or whatever. Celtic will win the league. I don't doubt that at all. I don't like saying it, but it's just where we are at the moment. But finally, Caroline, we've learned that if you can stop their midfield from producing and giving Callum McGregor an easy time of it, then you can stop Celtic. Celtic had to make 3 changes on the hour mark. Again, manager didn't feel a need to be able to react to that. Quite happy just to see things continue as they were. And then Rangers do get the second goal from a corner, no less. My word. I mean, have you ever seen such a thing? Great ball in by Czerny. Raskin, I thought, was so unlucky here because he gets a fantastic header on this brilliant drive. Good bit of whip, just, direct. Schmeichel does make a good save, but Robin Proper, as he called it in his post-match, was in the back zone. I don't know if I've ever heard it called that, but I'm not a statistician. And is there to be able to finish. Proper has been much maligned. We've spoken a lot about where I think some of his deficiencies are. He just really, I think, needs to be able to try and understand the physicality of the domestic game. He may not be here come the end of this January transfer window. We will see. But he has had some good performances. He's had some poor wins, especially at Motherwell. But for this finish, just to be absolutely in the right place at the right time, and it's a great strike just back across the goal. And you could see how much it meant to him. There was probably a little bit, and I don't blame him for this, by the way, there's probably a little bit of him saying, you have to now eat your own cake because that's me answered some of your questions and stuff. But I'm always happy to be able to see players who haven't been in great form, haven't had brilliant performances consistently, have faced criticism, and rightly so, been able to answer back with a goal in an Old Firm game. His first goal for Rangers. And yeah, like I say, if that's going to give him a confidence lift, given our injury issues at the moment, if that gives him another platform to build on, then as I say, I'm absolutely delighted for him. I think the thing for me here, though, was even though Raskin was unlucky with his header, his celebration after it when he saw the proper finish was it's just great to see. And yeah, as I say, 2-0 up. Celtic haven't really troubled us at all, apart from a great save by Liam Kelly from Hatate. But yeah, as I say, this is what we were wanting. We just wanted the second just to make it slightly easier on ourselves and not do that thing that we've been so common on in Old Firm games, which is, start to fade out of it. We just kept the momentum going, and we absolutely got our reward for this.
Yeah, and I agree with you, because I think although the game had been pretty comfortable up until the second goal, the remainder of the first half and that start of the second half. You just don't know if we're going to be undone by not taking our chances and having them, you know, sneak back into the game, because they've done that to us plenty of times. So to get that second goal and be able to breathe a little bit and see that continued pressure all across the pitch, everyone just continuing to harass Celtic, was fantastic to see. And you're right, Proper had a bit of a swagger about him after that. So his wee pat on the Celtic player, I can't even remember who it was now. He just had a complete swagger, and he's got to enjoy those moments. He's had his fair share of criticism, deservedly so. He's not had the best of performances when he's been called upon. I think he hoped that he would be a regular starter in that centre half pairing, and realistically, he's not going to be when we're at full strength, because he simply hasn't been putting in the performances that justify it. However, to come in and to play like he did, especially to have a centre half pairing that is just brand new thrown together, and for both of them to do as well as they did, to keep that concentration, to keep the setup, that they need to defend properly, at the points where they had to. Although I don't think Celtic really troubled us too much, but it was very disciplined, I thought. And on the other end of the pitch, for him to be alert to that ball coming back out from the initial Raskin header and capitalise on it, it's fantastic. And again, to go back to Raskin, I could sing his praises all day, but again, it's a sign of a true captain. I'm sure he was a little bit disappointed that his attempt didn't go in, but he could not have looked happier at the fact that the team had got that second goal, and the fact that Proper, who I'm sure has had a tough time of it, was the person to get that goal. That's the sign of a true leader, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, you can see the players celebrating with Proper, where I think, they were delighted for him. And, we have to remember that these guys are human beings as well. I don't care what anyone says. Players are aware of some of the criticism that's put towards him. I don't think he'll have been happy with his own performances. I don't think that the move has started as well as he would have liked. Maybe this is him now starting to turn the corner, but we're going to come on a little bit later on to talk about where we need some degrees of consistency. The manager did make his first change, Caroline, on 80 minutes. Nadim Bajrami going off for Danilo. And with almost his first touch of the ball, I think, Danilo is able to make it 3-0 with a lovely slide through Kasper Schmeichel's legs after a great build-up play. Prior to this, Czerny was very, very unlucky when he broke through with the ball, curled it beautifully, and was able to hit off the post. But even with those chances, in terms of the Proper finish and obviously the Danilo goal, we weren't sitting back. We weren't taking anything for granted in terms of allowing Celtic to come towards us. The Danilo finish is just a proper striker's finish. I think it's just a great instinctive, sweep to be able to make sure that you hit the ball low and hard. You're always going to be in with a chance. And again, Danilo, it's just great to be able to see him back playing regularly. It's great to be able to see him scoring goals. And again, another player who's really made a difference for us.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was his first touch, because I watched back the goal and I couldn't see anything prior to that. I was just delighted for him, because again, he's had to be patient. There was a lot of calls yesterday for Danilo starting, and whether that would have been the better setup, the better choice, because he has been playing well and he has offered a fantastic goal threat. So for him to bide his time a little bit and come on a little later in the game and to get his goal. I was also trying to see if I could spot his dad anywhere jumping about in the crowd, but I didn't yesterday, because he's been a highlight since Danilo's come back into the team and had a good bit of form. But you're right, he does have that instinct, and he's someone that is going to be big for us for the rest of the year, I think. It's a shame because, Dessers, I know we saw a little bit later too. It's just not going to work out. You're still hearing a little bit of booing for his name coming on. I think there's still some hard feelings after the cup final, and I just can't see a way back for him. However, with Danilo, you can see the chance that he's got to become a fantastic striker at the club.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And again, more praise for the manager. Brings on Robbie Fraser. Robbie Fraser, who has today now made a move across to Livingston on loan, but he comes on, and the manager does the right thing by tuning up some of the injury time by bringing on 3 substitutes. Dessers come on, so did Connor Barron, and so did Cortez as well. Rangers saw out the game, as we kind of mentioned, in fairly comfortable fashion. Celtic were absolutely not at the races at all, but that's because of how well we were playing. And, again, I have to give praise to the manager. There was maybe opportunities even about the kind of hour mark where I felt, he is going to make changes, but he's stuck with it. He's taken a lot of criticism because of all of the conversation around sports science and the selection of players, who's available, who's not, etc. But I have to be honest with you, as much as Philippe Clement has made some major mistakes across the course of this season, he got this absolutely right yesterday. And I thought it was just a great idea just to make sure that we draw the game out, just make sure that we don't do anything silly. That's exactly, it's excellent game management.
Yeah, I was surprised actually that I thought Celtic were so tepid after that second goal. I thought we would see a little bit of drive from them, a little bit of an attempt to come back into the game. And whilst they had a lot of possession, I thought they'd offered very little with it. I never felt uncomfortable at the point that we got that second goal because I didn't think there was any threat from them to come back into the game. Obviously, you can breathe a complete sigh of relief at the third goal and you know that's the game done and dusted. But truly, I don't think I ever felt that there was any danger after that second goal went in. It seemed that they were resigned to the fact it wasn't their day. And that's very unlike the Celtic teams that we've seen and we've come up against in the last few years. So that's a step change. And yeah, to kind of give praise to Clement, based solely on the cup final and now this game, he seems to have developed a knack of knowing how to set up against them, despite the obvious issues that we had with the team available to us and injuries. He had he had the mark of Brendan Rodgers and that Celtic team undeniably yesterday, and I think as well for the cup final. It's that unlucky thing when you come to penalties. It's chance, isn't it, for the most part? So yeah, I mean the fact that I've been critical of Clement. There have been a couple of times over this season where I've probably come to the point where I've said I think enough's enough, but he continues to at times make me doubt and prove me wrong. And I have to concede that in Europe he seems to have the setup and the approach pretty much as good as we can expect. He's starting to do the same with Old Firm games, it would seem. What I think he still has to spend a bit of time doing is setting up and prepping his team for that low block where we're going to have a lot of possession and we're going to have to find a way to grind out a victory in those very difficult games. It's not easy to kind of have all three operating well and kind of in conjunction, but if that's something that he can start to improve, then you know we could see him continue to be manager, where I thought that wouldn't be possible a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and I think, this is where it's an interesting conversation with Rangers fans, because I think most people going into the game yesterday would have felt if it was going to be a really hefty defeat against Celtic, that could have been the end of it. That could have been Philippe Clement's time at Rangers coming up. And it's interesting. I don't think that there has been a massive shift change in people's opinions about Clement, because this is where we are obviously about to talk about Hibs, but this is where it's so confounding at times, because you put in performances like Nice and Olympiacos and Celtic, incredibly unlucky in the League Cup final, and yet you go to Fir Park and you go to Paisley and you struggle in some of these places where you just think it shouldn't happen. Now, obviously, the games I've just mentioned, you are playing against opponents who will give you a little bit more space to operate. They won't be as tightly packed and condensed to be able to try and get something out of the game. That is not a criticism of any of our other domestic opponents. As far as I'm concerned, that's a Rangers problem. They have to be able to break down. Celtic are very good at it. That's why they're in the position they are in. What Philippe Clement has to do for me now, Caroline, is he needs a run. He needs to make sure that this isn't another very temporary peak and then we go back into a dip. How much he is going to have to take on board the injury situation, player fatigue, etc., whatever else happens within the transfer window, because what I think has changed is that if we said 4 weeks ago, who would you get rid of in the transfer window from the current squad, a number of players have almost played themselves back into contention of staying at Rangers. We don't know what will happen, but how we strengthen will be very interesting. We have not been great in recent transfer windows, so I don't think any of us are expecting huge miracles. But what Flint Clermont has to be able to do now is use games like the Old Firm win at New Year as a benchmark to say this is the standard that you have to be at, because if you can play to that standard and you can maintain it, it's not an easy thing to do, but by and large, you will have far more success against the rest of the league, whether it's at home or away. There just seems to be, and this is where I think most people are at, and certainly where I'm at, this feeling that it could only be temporary rather than being able to see some degree of consistency across the course of the next few games.
Yeah, I mean, while I think that our first 11 v first 11, against Celtic or even Spurs or whoever, stands up quite nicely, and on their day they can do quite remarkable things, that you have to acknowledge at the same time that the overall squad quality and squad depth isn't there. And it's going to take some time to build up. Like you say, we had a pretty large task on our hands to improve the squad from where we saw last season. We've done that in parts, but not everything's going to work out the way that you want it to. And we still need a bit of work to improve that. I think, unfortunately, what Celtic do well is that they've got that belief for the majority of the games that they can go in and grind it a victory, even if it's difficult. And that's why you see them so often get that last minute winner. And I don't know that we've yet, as a squad, built up that self belief yet that we can and also should be winning those games with regularity. So I think with a kind of better quality of overall squad, and with that player that you can call upon, especially when you're playing twice a week, and you can bring people off the bench that are going to add value and quality, I think that will help on the domestic front. It needs to, because equally, while we're quite satisfied here, having had a nice, enjoyable day yesterday, it could have been an unthinkable 17 points behind at this point in the year, which is just unacceptable, really. So an awful lot of work still needs to be done on this squad by the manager, by some individual players in the squad who, as we've seen, can really impress you and surprise you on some big occasions, but equally can, when it is Fir Park and it's a game that they're not quite so up for, completely let you down. So overall, lots more work to be done. But, like I've seen lots of people say already, it doesn't mean we can't enjoy yesterday for what it was. Having watched a lot of really depressing Old Firm games in recent years, you have to be able to enjoy yesterday for just what it was.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so we are through to Edinburgh on Sunday afternoon, Caroline, to take on a Hibs team that, let's be honest, has absolutely been able to find a good degree of form, top form in the country as things stand at the moment. And this is where it is going to be the acid test. It's all very well being able to produce a performance like that against Celtic and enjoy it as it is, because it's always enjoyable being able to beat them. But our away form, especially across the course of December, has been incredibly poor, and we now need to be able to take into January some confidence from that performance against Celtic. It will be an interesting lineup. The manager said after the game yesterday that he doubts that Tavernier and Butland will be back for this week or potentially the week after. But now this is where, we have to ensure that we don't allow another drop, because it nullifies the victory against Celtic. I think Celtic will want to be able to recover from that, so there's every chance that we could have a bit of a change in the points gap, but that's back to us to be able to respond accordingly. And we need to make sure that we do our jobs properly. This is where the manager is really being questioned upon, is our performances away from home. They have been awful. However, if we want to be able to take the positives from yesterday, there isn't a reason, as far as I'm concerned, if Rangers can go and apply the same level of discipline and dominance that you've mentioned, that we shouldn't be able to get 3 points against Hibs.
Yeah, and it is a tall order. It's a big ask because of the number of games, the sheer number of games that we've had over the end of December, beginning of January. It's thick and fast, and we've got, like you say, Hibs who are in some fine form at the moment and really have had a bit of a turnaround. And then we've got only a couple more games before we play Aberdeen, and I'm sure that'll be difficult. I know that they've lost a bit of that early form that they saw, which isn't completely surprising when you kind of look at Aberdeen's typical kind of year on year performances, but nevertheless, they raise their game exponentially when it comes to playing us, and I've no doubt that they will be coming to Ibrox with a view to trying to get themselves on a back of on a bit better form, back to that kind of winning form, and also to beat the team that they absolutely despise the most in the country. So that won't be easy either. And like you say, what I hope to see is just that better consistency, because like you say, for us, we have seen some fantastic performances, and then we've had some pretty awful ones that we've had to endure. So just that better level of consistency, and also where we do get the opportunity to potentially capitalise on the team across the city dropping some points, we have to be able to do that. I think what was most disappointing and most galling over the last kind of couple of weeks is seeing that opportunity present itself and not being able to capitalise on it again. And that's been a common theme over the last few years. So if we get that opportunity again, not that I think that it's going to make any difference to the overall outcome of the league, we have to, in order to just generally improve and get into that mindset of being able to be ruthless, we have to take advantage of that if it happens.
Yep, and listen, that's a combination of a number of factors. So obviously the manager has to look at being able to maintain that. I suppose that the correct selection. It's very little doubt to me that Ridvan will continue at right back. Liam Kelly will obviously still remain in goals. I've got zero issues with those selections. I think that, as you mentioned earlier on, Diamande will play a big important role within being able to try and control parts of the pace of the game. Czerny, very unlucky with a couple of chances against Celtic. Egerman, wasn't poor by any standard. Yesterday, I don't think he had, he's anywhere near a poor game. But again, there will be other opportunities for him to be able to come up. And this is where I think, for me, we can't go into this with any kind of degree of trepidation. We have to look at it as an opportunity. I've said that before. When we've had these spurts of positivity, because once you get the result against Nice and against Spurs, you want to be able to take the best you can from those performances. What we have to do now collectively is just start to believe in ourselves a little more, understand that we are better than we've been playing recently, and just use that performance against Celtic as a motivator to say, right, let's just maintain that standard. If we can improve on it, fantastic. That's great. But consistency is key.
Yeah, consistency is the main thing, and what we all want, I think, and I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone, but the feeling I get and the feeling that I certainly have is that we have punched massively above our weight in Europe, and that's been lovely. And I think to help build up a bit of pride, and also to help with our finances, that was really important. And I know that for a lot of the players, and certainly from the Gerrard era, that was something which is a real target for the team at the start of every season. They wanted to bring that back, and it's been lovely. However, what I'd like to see more is a shift back to that focus on how we perform domestically, because while we have punched above our weight in Europe, there's nothing nicer than, of course, winning your the domestic trophies available to you. And the key to that is being able to just have that consistency, which Celtic have done very well, and we've not been able to manage in recent years, with the exception of the 55 season, of course. So yeah, that's what I want to see, and I think that'll unlock the kind of domestic success that we're longing for.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, listen, that will do us for this week. I hope you've enjoyed listening. It's always been a pleasure to be able to come on. We've got some really exciting content across on our Patreon site, patreon.com/Heart and Hand. If you're not a subscriber already, then please jump on over to check out all of our great pods, a brilliant archive, and why not start off your 2025 by joining a fantastic community. Thank you to our executive producers, Mike Lee, Paul Miles. Thank you all for listening. And most importantly for me, thank you to my wonderful guest, Caroline Morrison, who, as I say, didn't really know what she was signing up for when she already agreed to this, but hopefully you've enjoyed coming on to talk about a fantastic victory for Rangers over Celtic.
I certainly have, Cammy. I will do this type of show anytime. And yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on, and a happy new year to everyone listening.
Yeah, absolutely. David will be back on Monday with the flagship as well to unpack the Hibs game, and I'll be back with you next week. Until then, have a brilliant weekend, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.